And then we'll go live. All right. Okay, we're live. Good evening, everyone. We're just going to wait a minute while everyone logs on to make sure everyone can see and hear tonight. If you're having any technical issues, you can use the chat to let us know and we can help you out. Thank you so much for being here. Right, we'll just wait another 30 seconds as everybody's logging on, and then we'll kick off our program this evening. Okay, why don't we get started? Good evening and welcome to the Milwaukee Public Library Book Chat. My name is Beth and I'm the adult librarian here at the East Branch Library. My co-host tonight is my esteemed colleague Anaya, who is a librarian at Central. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yay. And then feel free to use the chat box. You can tell us where you're calling in from or where you're listening in and share your own book recommendations or questions. The chat is being recorded, so you don't need to worry about taking any notes or writing any book titles down. So we'll send you the link in a couple days, and we'll also send you an email with all of the books and items we've talked about this evening. I'm going to throw it over to Anaya to introduce our special guest.
Thank you all for coming tonight, tuning in. Today we have Piper Huguley. She's the author of By Her Own Design, as well as Home to the Milford College and the Migration of the Heart series. She is a multiple-time Golden Heart finalist. Piper blogs about the history behind her novels on her website. She lives in Atlanta, Georgia with her husband and her son. And she also teaches at Clark Atlanta University.
Yay! Thanks for being here tonight, Piper. How are you?
Having me. I'm really glad to be here.
I'm going to turn our screen off for now. Yeah, I know Piper from hanging out with romance folks online, so I was just thrilled when she agreed to join us here at the Milwaukee Public Library, especially for Women's History Month, which just started, and because Piper recently had a book published called By Her Own Design and has a new book coming out in a month, but in April?
Yes, less than a month now.
Yep. So yay, we'll talk about that in a little bit. So I'm so glad you were able to join us. For those who are listening that might be new to you in your work, do you have like a quick elevator speech about what kind of books you like to write?
Well, just to a particular juncture, most of what I've written is historical. The settings of my books take place in the past, and I have sort of two sets of work, if you will, in terms of my historical romances, which are based in real history, but with fictitious characters as the protagonists, with and I mentioned the Home to Milford College series and the Migrations of the Heart series, which were independently published, and my traditionally published books are what Amazon calls anyway biographical historical fiction, which foregrounds a real life protagonist, somebody who really existed, and a fictionalized version of the life events that they lived through. But I do have one contemporary outside of that in terms of that, and I guess I have to mention that because I think you guys have that in your holdings. So.
Yep, and you should all check that one out too because I really liked it. It's Sweet Tea.
Yes, it's a contemporary romance novel.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Loved it. So we're really going to kind of focus tonight on By Her Own Design, which is a novel of Anne Lowe, who is a historical real person that was around in real life. So we have two kids' books about her, which I grabbed just to show everyone because they're beautiful and you should check these out too. Because I will tell you, when I was done reading the book, I was like, okay, now I need to go and like look up every photo that I can find because I need to see these gowns. Can you give us a quick overview of the book for those who might not have read it yet?
By Her Own Design is about Anne Lowe, who is best known as the Black fashion designer of Jacqueline Bouvier's wedding gown when she married John F. Kennedy in not Junior, but she married her son, John F. Kennedy, in 1953. But she was a designer of custom bespoke gowns and wedding gowns and debutante gowns for a lot of the very wealthy women of what was known as the social register. So she designed these custom gowns for famous people and famous families like Roosevelt and DuPont. And she designed for Marjorie Merriweather Post as well. She also designed a gown for Olivia de Havilland when she won her first Oscar. So she had a designing career that lasted for more than 5 decades, actually. And part of the aspect of her in terms of, why I decided to write her book, a book about her life, was to shine a light on someone who should be celebrated at least in February and March every year. And I don't know if it's because of my efforts or not, but that is something that is happening. So that's what I've always wanted, is for people to know better about her contributions to history. When we talk about fashion designers, we get a lot of male names a lot of the time. For example, on Apple TV, recently they started a series called The New Look that centers around Christian Dior. We get a lot of male names, Coco Chanel too, when we do get a female name, but it's not as frequent. And so I think it's important to notice and uplift those who were doing this work as well during that particular time period, approximately the first half-ish of the 20th century.
I was very much struck reading the book that she was never really credited, like how we watch like the Oscars today, and it's like, who are you wearing? And they did not say Anne Lowe's name.
Right. Because they possibly did not know that.
Yep.
So that's how undercover, at least for the Olivia de Havilland Commission, how deeply undercover that particular commission was. It was the label, very important aspect in terms of what a designer's contributions were, did not have her name on it at all. So it's entirely possible that for Olivia de Havilland, from her perspective, that given the real life story of the designing of that gown, she didn't know. I depicted it a little differently in the book, but in real life aspects, she may not have been aware.
Yeah. So what I liked a lot about it was that it is told in Anne's point of view, which I found so like gripping, and I had a hard time. Like I read it, like I couldn't put it down. So thank you for that. So if anyone who hasn't read it yet, just be prepared. So you're gonna sit down and just want to go, because it starts with Anne, like the day before she passes, and she's hearing about Diana being engaged to Charles and talking about like what kind of wedding gown, like possibly. Like I loved how you started that. Like what is that really? Did she really die the day after they got engaged?
I'm enough of a nerd that I knew that.
I love that.
About what her dates were, I said, "Oh, that was the day after Charles and Diana." That's how much of a nerd I am.
That's
And
what
that's
I
what
love. Like what a great plot device. I was like,
that's
I was like, I'm ready.
did not know how nerdy someone could be. Yeah. No, I saw my editor put out on Twitter a notice to say who will write this novel for me, and she retweeted an article about Anne Lowe. And so I looked at it, and I knew she was in the back of my mind, but I didn't know what her life story was. So I read the article, and then I went and did some more internet research where I saw the dates, and I was like, that was the day after Charles and Diana got engaged. I bet you that if she were like alive and cognizant, she probably was thinking about, because I'm old enough to remember, like, everybody was looking for that dude to get married. And so all the wedding dress designers, like, who's going to get that commission? And, so, I mean, I'm not, if you read all my other books, there's no prologues. I've never written a prologue before.
It was a good one.
I was like, all of a sudden, it occurred to me, that's what a prologue is for. So I immediately sat down and wrote that prologue. And I sent it to my agent. And I said, tell her I'm on this. Don't let anybody else near it.
That's so perfect. I love that so much. So I assume you had at least heard the name, before you got the project. And
Yes, because I was
what?
always interested in the
Mhm,
Kennedys, like another one of my little nerdy proclivities. I guess a
excellent.
nerdy child who didn't have homework during the summer, so I'd create homework for
Yeah.
myself. So then I would go to my local library branches,
Mhm,
right, and do the research. And so one summer it was the Kennedy assassination. So I got to know all about the Kennedys. And so I always knew like who like in their orbit were Black people. So
mhm,
I knew like the JFK, he had the first Black Secret Service agent, and I knew that he also had the first Black astronaut. He just didn't go up with everybody else
mhm,
in terms of that. And I knew about Ann Lowe. So I saw always in the back of my mind, I knew Ann Lowe and who she was, even though Jackie biographies, and this still is happening because, it seems like every year at least a couple of Jackie
mhm,
biographies will come out. If they talk about Ann Lowe, then they refer to her very obliquely
mhm,
as like, family seamstress, as in the Kitty Kelly version, or a seamstress or whatever. And part of my book was to say, no, 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 no. She was more than that. This was a woman who was designing, who was named in the 20s of all times, a Gasparilla designer in Tampa, 3 years running in a southern state. This woman was known as a fashion designer. We're not like just throwing her off to the side as a seamstress. It was more than that in terms of what
mhm,
she did. So yeah, the whole aspect with Jacqueline Bouvier and her commissions with her. She'd been working with the family for
mhm,
years.
mhm,
She came on board with a cousin, and the cousin referred her to Janet Auchincloss, Jackie's mother, when she married for the second time. Angelo did her wedding outfit for that wedding. When it came time for Jackie to become a debutante, she did Jackie's Deb dress. She was Deb of the Year in 1947 in an Ann Lowe original. Her
mhm,
sister, when she was Deb of the Year 4 years later, Anlo did that dress and did Jackie's dress for that. She had an ongoing relationship with the family in terms of these dresses. And beyond that, designed her stepsister's Deb dress, her half sisters, as well as her wedding gown. So this was a relationship that she had
mhm,
with the family. And like I said, me knowing in the background this whole aspect, oh, a Black woman had designed her wedding gown, but not knowing much about her life story, this was the opportunity that I had to find that out and do research on it.
What was your favorite part of the research process that you got to do? Did you get to go
Um,
anywhere cool or like see a dress in real life or?
it was during the pandemic.
Mm. We'll make it happen for you. That's a bucket list we need to make happen. But okay. So how did you make that work for you?
So, certain things that I knew in terms of the research, like the fact that the only video of her appearance on the Mike Douglas show, because I'm again old enough to have remembered that, at least with like that it was on whenever I got out of school. It was on at the baby's
Mhm.
house. We wanted her to put on cartoons kind of
Yep.
age, but I
Watch
knew
her program.
right.
Mhm.
Like, I could talk to my students about that. They'd be like, who, yeah,
You're like,
So yeah. Um that she appeared in December 1964 on the show. And I knew like where that videotape most likely was because it was not online. Because, of course, this whole line in terms of what was video versus what was film right?
Mhm.
So there were access to shows, I think, that were the film, but not the video that were online. So you couldn't get anything prior to, I think, 66 or something like that.
Mhm.
And so I couldn't get my hands on, that video. Like, But
Mhm.
yeah, so I wrote the book. Finally, though, when it did appear online, I think again, as a consequence of this growing acknowledgement of who Anne Lowe was and her contribution to history, when they finally put it up, YouTube, I was like, I knew that's where it was in Philadelphia, from Group W, from where all the Mike Douglas videos would have been. But the thing for me, that at least resonated with me as a person who is a scholar as well, was the thesis by Margaret Powell, and it's why the
Mhm.
novel is dedicated to her, a textile scholar who was a young woman who died when she was in her mid 40s, doing this research, working toward the what she had hoped to accomplish was a scholarly, comprehensive biography about Anne Lowe, which she richly deserves, and was, as apparently as I understand it, was working right up until the day before she died on the project, but didn't happen. And so, as a scholar, I've seen so many women working on these lifelong projects and not seeing anything come to fruition because they're exhausted or get sick, and sometimes more often than I'd like to say, die as a consequence. And I knew I'm not a textile scholar, but
Mhm.
I could shine a light, hopefully, on Anne Lowe herself in order to hopefully seed the project in some way. Um, to make that happen. And then the other aspect, of course, that Margaret was working on was exhibit of her gowns, which is something that has actually happened this past year. Again, I don't know if my little stuff had anything to do with it, but that was one of her two wishes. So um, again, raising her profile was the key for me and the end goal for me in terms of writing the book and the project.
Mhm. And it's just so, as a person who has studied history and knowing historians, like it's so cool that you got to do this. And come on, yes, it's this work that's helping bring this up because,
Just wrong, right?
I'm just gonna say it.
It was in the zeitgeist, a little bit.
Mhm.
It's like, okay, we just shine a light on these little parts where, like, there's little articles here and there coming out or whatever. We can just like get. Part of the frustrating thing, of course, for me as a scholar is like some of the stuff the articles are saying isn't quite right or whatever, or like when she pop up on TikTok and people was like saying some stuff,
And you're like,
that's not,
mm,
you know.
like, wait a
But yeah,
minute.
I can't, like necessarily intervene in these things in the sort of upfront manner, like to say that's wrong. That's not the way
Mhm.
to do it. But you know, to just say, well, she's getting talked about more, and that's what you have to hold on
Mhm.
to.
Well, and giving a voice to somebody that is by all rights just as talented and amazing
Yeah,
as these other designers we have. And it's just because the evidence is there, right? So, and like there is evidence of Anne Lowe in all these places and pulling them all together. And then, you're writing from her point of view. Did you have any like ways that you kind of helped get yourself in that headspace while you were writing to kind of inhabit like her story?
there's sort of several serendipitous things I thought about in terms of that enabled me to do that. And one of them I thought was like taking a look at her life through the lens of an artist, because this is what fashion designers are. And we don't give them enough credit or shine for that, I think, because very often, in terms of what they're doing, it's what's highlighted most often is for women. So it's like sort of downgraded as something that is flimsy or not important or anything else like that. So that was one thing for me. And what it just so happened, my dissertation research focused on looking at particular authors and their lives as artists. So that was something I had already been doing a certain kind of research about. And so by taking that lens and applying it to Anne Lowe's life, I was able to gain some more insight. But there were like other things, like where Anne Lowe was born was 2 counties over from where my paternal great grandmother was born. So I already knew from family stories what her early years might have looked like and certain things about her in terms of her research, like there would be no birth certificate kinds of aspects. So that was also helpful for me in terms of thinking about those early years, as well as in terms of one of the scholars I had looked at in my dissertation was Zora Neale Hurston, who everybody thinks of Zora Neale Hurston as a Floridian, but she was actually born in Alabama, again, another 2 counties over from where Anne Lowe had lived. So because of my dissertation work, I had already looked at a Black woman in a similar time, even though Zora had lied several times about her age. It was around the same time that Anne Lowe was born, and nearly the same regional vicinity. So those things were helpful to sort of bring or flesh out those early years and thinking about what her voice would have been like potentially, which when I finally did get to see the Mike Douglas show tape, I was, yay, I was on target, that. Yeah, it would have been ugly if I hadn't been, so.
I love that. So one of the things that, immediately struck me is that she was very young when she first got married. We are saying 12 in the book, which was, I have a 12-year-old. So it was like, whoo, and I just liked how delicately and like unflinchingly still like handled that, because it's like that was her life.
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
in her point of view, like she didn't think that that was a bad thing at first, right? Like she loved that man and she was going to do what she was going to do. And I just appreciated, just honest, and I think I read in the back matter, talking about how like her first husband might have lied to a census taker about how old she was or when her birthday was. And that was all very fascinating to me, because some people are like, well, what's in the historic record? And they take that as fact. And it's like, well, what motivations did these people have to tell the truth? Or why did they say that? Like, let's interrogate the fact, so.
I mean, it's like the whole kind of thing, and I often get that question. I mean, I always get that question with the research. People are like, this was Jim Crow Alabama. Like, they weren't trying to capture research about my ancestors in Jim Crow Alabama. Let's just, just say that. They weren't trying to capture that. So, when I, found out, of course, how close in proximity where Anne Lowe was born and lived for several years before they moved to Montgomery was in terms of my family. That's what I mean. That kind of thing I already knew. And it's helpful to have that sense going into a project, what you can find and what you can't find in terms of the historical record. And like I said, part of that is, like you're saying, making it clear in terms of thinking about things like the census when it comes to a marginalized population. What do people say in that moment when the taker is asking for information, what they don't? There is a certain kind of aspect in terms of the discussions that take place that people have to like imagine or think about why what's in that record may be falsified, may not be necessarily true. And that also worked again in another different way in terms of my next book after that. Like when you have these census takers, who people coming into the community who are not of the community trying to find out information, are people necessarily going to be 100% forthcoming and truthful? Yeah, so it
Like, let's be like, think about
Every time I was thinking about that, I think a little bit more, and I think that someone like if me coming from the same population in terms of that means that I have a little bit more insight into that.
absolutely. And why it just felt, yes, I'm just glad that that was the thing, and like, let's interrogate this.
Yeah, like you're saying, with the whole child rights situation,
hmm
that and I've done many book clubs, and inevitably somebody will say my grandmother was
hmm
13 or 14 or some crazy thing like this, and say this was a historical phenomenon that did happen. It may happen even like on a more famous, like fame Decent Plateau, if you know about Jerry Lee Lewis, about even Elvis and Priscilla, while he didn't marry when she was young. They started when she was 14. Greta Lynn, these things did occur. And for your 12-year-old, just, the horrifying aspect of that, like potentially, and I've spoken like to an audience of that age, and they're just, horrified to know that such a thing could have happened, but it is history.
hmm
And it's good for them to know. Which is why one of the plaudits I'm most proud of is when Parents Magazine designated or put it on the list for one of the good ways for ages 12 and up to learn about Black history. So
I absolutely agree. And it was like, it's reality. Like, this is what happened. Honestly, like, people are still kind of doing that today, which
well,
is
this was
the horrifying thing, and maybe.
about like Tennessee in 2022. Hello, they were passing some piece of marriage legislation and did not put an age in there. And
hmm
they had to be told to go back and put in 18 as a minimum.
It's like like we're kind of regressing in
Um,
certain ways, and like, this book
mhm.
is a perfect example of why we shouldn't be doing that, and thank you. Yes. And
Because that circumstance for her was it was an enslavement
yeah.
circumstance. This is what he was, and at the times when she deigned to talk about it, because she didn't want to talk about it, particularly
hmm
after she discovered, in terms of servicing these clients who were of a different class, etc., that they were disgusted by it, So there were certain jump points where she clammed up about it. But the few times that she did deign to say anything about it was that he didn't want me to sew, which I took to mean that he didn't want her to sew what she wanted to sew, because looking at that census record, it said that he was a tailor, which brought in all kinds of interesting story possibilities to me to
hmm
say, oh, he was a tailor and he just happens to have married this prodigy of this young wizard dress. It's a word to say sorceress of
Right.
Ross, who made her own first dress and she was 8 years old. He just happened upon her and her mother and her grandmother, who she had learned all of this stuff from. No, he was using her. He was exploiting her for his own ends. And that's how, in terms of how historical fiction works, it's the kind of thing you do is you try to take the historical record, the facts, if you will, and
hmm
then you can create, at least for me, what is most plausible out of those stories to create your narratives.
hmm I absolutely loved your depiction of her mother and her grandmother and that community they had, sewing together from when Anne was like teeny tiny and giving her the scraps and like, you're supposed to be working on your quilt blocks, Anne, and she's instead like making these flowers and experimenting, and she was an artist, and like you depicted that in such a loving way that even through the difficult things, it's like her mother and grandmother were doing again what the best they could in the
Right.
circumstances that they had with her.
Investing in her, as they now say, pouring into her, believing in her talent, believing that she had a talent that was even exceeded theirs in terms of what she was capable of. Yeah, and and she talked a lot about that in later interviews. So,
and having her mother build kind of the framework for how she would present herself to her society women that she was, becoming her patron. And like it was just like I wanted to read more and more about them. And I was like, Grandma, don't go. I get emotional when I read. I can't help it.
her, when her mother died suddenly, when she's 16 in the middle of the commission for the incoming First Lady of Alabama. And she goes to the woman and says, my mother died or whatever, 16 years old,
And you're like,
I have a baby. And, she's all like, oh, I'm so sorry, my dress is ready,
like, right. And I'm like, I could just see that scene in my mind. And I was like,
yeah, she finished the commission at 16 years old, and that's what the incoming First Lady of Alabama wore, 4 dresses. So, yeah.
It's just remarkable. And like how, are you aware of like how many pieces that are still around that like people could see somewhere or study, like if they were a textile scholar?
People should be looking in their attics. Sometimes these things come up. People have them and they don't know what they have, or secondhand stores. Some of these things have emerged from, or whatever. When you see something that looks really stunning, or it has floral touch, or you could tell it's well made. Look inside and see. She would make these other touches to her creations, like lining the seams with lace, building the undergarments into the dresses so other undergarments wouldn't interfere with the lines that she was creating. All of that stuff, it's things that are still emerging. People may still have them. But what was exhibited at the Winter Thur this past fall and winter, that were 40 gowns that they managed to collect from various museums. And this is where they are. The ones that are known, at least wherever, are held by museums because the craft of what it was that she produced was so excellent that that's where they're held, not in like clothing shops or whatever for people to be wearing. So that's what when they assembled them together, save Jackie's original wedding dress, which is in the JFK Library in Boston. It's not on display. They've taken that off a display. It used to be on display, and you know how before conservationists were aware of like damage or whatever. Oh, we'll just throw it on a mannequin over there, whatever. No, it's like gravity was pulling on the stitches and pulling it apart. But they had to take it off display. They made a paper recreation of it. But then, because of the Winter Thur exhibit, the fashion design professor at the University of Delaware made it a project with some of her students. So she was permitted to go up to Boston and photograph and take measurements and all that other kind of stuff. And then came back to Delaware and with the students recreated the dress. So
that's so cool.
Yeah, I know. As a professor, I was like, yay.
That's so cool.
Get that hands-on experience. And so those young people can know, oh, my fingers are sore. Oh, yeah, you think, huh?
You think? Well, I had no idea that she got that commission to do Jacqueline Kennedy's first gown, right? And then 2 weeks before they all got like destroyed?
Yeah. So yeah, say to the students, so imagine you're doing that. Your fingers hurt now, right? Imagine that something happens to the dresses in the shop 10 days before the wedding and you have to do it all over again. Imagine that situation.
I was like, stop it. I found this book in our library. It's called The Wedding Dresses, the 50 designs that changed the course of bridal fashion. And Ann Lowe is in here, so I was happy to see.
I do have that book. Yes.
Yeah, so I was happy to see that. And And it's really cool. You can check it out. I'll put a link in our follow-up notes for everyone. But what struck me too was that Bouvier confessed later to hating her clumsy gown, and I was like, "What are you talking about?"
Yeah. It's like
It's
you've
like,
seen that description of clumsy in like so many places, and it's like, and particularly like I say, when you go to Windsor and looked at the recreation up close, it's like,
clumsy. Like maybe
really?
you were just unhappy with your whole situation, Jacqueline.
That was my potential thought.
That's what I took from your story. I was like, yeah, I
Yeah,
agree.
that's my theory. Like, for me, imagine little Piper studying all of the Kennedy stuff or whatever over the years. And everybody's I think, and then a lot of people say, well, why people look at the Camelot and how, whatever. If he was assassinated, that's why, but yeah,
It
that
was a society wedding. She
was
probably
a
had little control over any detail of that entire
he
affair.
didn't want to be married. Hey, what
No,
we
he sure
know
didn't.
now about his behavior was like this dude should not have been married. He should have been free to do as much tomcatting around as he wanted to. He did not want to be married, but he wanted to be president more. And
Mhm.
his father told him 35 means you've got to be married to someone or they're going to start talking about you.
Mhm.
And so who's nearby? This chick who can speak several languages and is accomplished and intelligent and not bad to look at and all of that stuff. She's the one. Put her finger on it. His father pushed him, and yeah, I
Mhm.
said, okay, yeah, that's what I need to do. So, yeah, and
Yeah.
I think a lot of that feeling, that intense feeling about the marriage and situation got transferred. Because then the other aspect of it is, of course, from the point of view of a historical fiction novelist, is like she never did anything else for Jackie again.
Mhm.
She did things for the other family members, like I said, her
Mhm.
stepsister, half sister, and all of that. But she never did anything for Jackie after that. And even when it came to the White House years, you don't get the upfront mentioning of her name when she's asked in a press conference coming in, First Lady, because that bridal gown at that time in the early 1950s was part of the move in terms of the change in bridal gown fashion in terms of what it was she had done. So that was that. Now that's so when she's asked, and people recognize that when she was coming in as first lady in '61, asked her, right? She didn't say the name. So there is a certain kind of intense feeling, you want to call it resentment, or whatever you want to call it, in terms of around the dress that is not about the exact dress necessarily.
That's exactly
Yeah.
how I was picturing it too. Because I was like, girl, you look beautiful. But,
Yeah.
you
And some,
know,
other people, like other book clubs, are like, hold up, you ruined my illusions about Jackie Kennedy, or something like that. But
like,
they
well,
were,
she was a historic person too with real feelings.
he was not perfect.
No, no. Um, yeah, I don't want to spoil too much more about the book because I feel like everybody should read it. It's history, but there's still some like twists and turns, and I just have to say it was like absolutely mesmerizing to read. And as we're getting a little closer, just looking through my questions.
Like about a woman's life, a woman who had a dream and what she went through to achieve it.
Hmm. Excellently captured. If you could wear any Anne Lowe design or
Mm.
have her design you a dress, which one?
Okay, well, now I sort of put one of her dresses on my one leg because that's probably.
We'll just magically, it fits like magic because she's magic, so it'll just work.
That's well, I know, like I said, when I went to the Winter Fair and I saw, I had one that was her favorite going in, but when I saw the dress that she did in 1968,
Mhm.
for she had okay, so her policy was about how she would be designing for people who belong to the social register, and she sort of very famously said in an Ebony interview, I don't design for any Mary or Sue. There's like certain people who have a certain amount of money, whatever, which did not include black people. There's a certain point. So in 1968, she came in contact with a doctor. No, it's not the previous 1968, but it was said she came in contact with a doctor who had a daughter who had studied music or whatever, and she needed a dress for a recital. So she agreed to do the dress for the daughter. So she did her recital dress, and then the very next year, which was 1968, she designed her wedding gown. And her wedding gown that she designed for her is sort of like belies what we think of as late 1960s wedding fashion. This dress was very romantic, and the inclusion of her usual floral signature and little tiny flowers all over. It was just, when seeing it in person, was just the highlight of the exhibit for me. Everybody's thinking about the Jackie dress, and it's like it was a cross in the Jackie dress, and in my perspective, it made the Jackie dress look like a runner-up. In terms that she like put love into this young woman's wedding gown that was really, really exquisite. So
Chills.
sure,
My favorite is this teal and black number with like a jacket. I have a picture of it. So I'm gonna pull our slides back up here. And then hold on, let me just minimize that and share my screen again. Ooh, hold on, I have to do something special. Stop share. Because I have a little video too. So
oh yes, we should.
I have to share sound. There we go. Otherwise it won't work. Boom. Okay. So there's Piper. And then yeah, Piper's next book is American Daughters. So that'll be out right at the beginning of April. And then I just have this quick little, it's literally like a minute long. So we're gonna quick watch this. Or it's not even a minute, like 15 seconds. So this is the exhibit, right?
Yes, that's the exhibit. I'm trying to see if they show it. No, that's not it. This Jackie dress. Oh, they didn't show it. See,
oh, here, let me play it one more time. Maybe.
Yeah, I really want. It's like,
that one's beautiful too.
Yeah, so it is. Bummer.
Oh,
Yeah.
I was like, I want to get my hand on a catalog. So, anyways,
catalog is fabulous. So yeah, anybody's like really, really into that. The catalog is on like your bookseller where they can order it for you or whatever. You can order it from there, and it's gorgeous. But the runner-up, my favorite was the Olivia de Havilland dress, which
that one she painted, right?
Right. She painted the flowers on, and still astonishes me. So that's how her usual floral signature is expressed in that particular dress, was that, yeah. And notice how it says unknown there.
Unknown.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's
best kept society's best kept secret. No longer secret. We don't like secrets. And then
the often thing in terms of the Deb dress with the roses on it was part of her floral, making the floral signature with fabric, etc. In terms of this. And so, yeah, with Jackie's dress, as you see depicted here, we talk about, oh, those wagon wheels on there. It's like, no, they're rosettes.
So and it was blush pink, right?
What?
Was it like a pinkish hue or was it white?
It was ivory.
Ivory, okay. Yep.
Yeah. So it was that's how she depicted the floral touch in terms of that. But all of those flounces and the bodice has that look, almost like a corseted medieval kind of look. But what she was talking about was Moonlight and Magnolias, kind of harkening back to her Alabama roots in terms of what her envisioning of the dress was, and that Joseph P. Kennedy you imagine your father-in-law being in on your wedding gown, but
Right.
his depiction, like I say, he's pushing these two together and he's going to see to everything, including the wedding gown, right? The fact that it was designed by a Black woman. He said, oh, good, that'll get Jack the vote in the South. So he was all on board with Anne Lowe, but then wanted a big dress because there were 800 at the church, the entire Senate and their wives, and 1,200 at Hammersmith Farm for the reception. Say she had to be seen. It couldn't be a little dress.
Yep.
Had to be a big one.
Big. Well, yeah. And I can only imagine, like, when I was trying on dresses with my mother, we had competing ideas. And we had to come together,
Yeah. And so imagine like your father-in-law being in on this, like, okay, what? But yeah, and of course, at this particular time in bridal fashion, you don't have the whole thing with the train, like being able to be bustled or to be taken on and off or whatever. She was lugging that thing around all day. So it had weight to it in terms of 50 yards of ivory taffeta.
Can you imagine her rich?
It's a tiny dress, she's not, she might have been tall, but she was not big,
No. Oh, goodness. And then I can get one more.
One of where she's working on it was also in the exhibit.
Oh, beautiful. Yeah, and I just wanted to get a close-up of these flowers because I just thought they were exquisite. And then, yeah, this was my favorite, this, like, coat and, like...
So you have, like, the lace depicting this floral touch or whatever, and just all of the ways in which she would finish all the seams and everything. She famously did a commission for recreating, if everybody remembers the First Lady exhibit, the way it used to look back in the day with all the First Lady dresses. And so Perfume Company wanted miniatures, not miniatures, but like a child size duplicates of lady dresses. And so she did that for the company, and did the same thing that she would do if somebody had really been wearing it, lined the seams and all of this stuff. And they're like, nobody's gonna see up underneath these dolls' dresses or whatever. It's like, that's how she did things.
100% or not at all. All right. And then as always with Book Chat, we do like to leave everyone with some other books they might want to read after they read your book. So Piper, do you want to go first?
Well, Jubilee by Margaret Walker for biographical historical fiction about Black women is mother. That's all there is to it. Margaret Walker took 30 years to write this book about her ancestor, who was a real woman who had been enslaved, and what her situation was while she was enslaved and after she was free, and started her family line, her maternal family line. So it's a very important book in terms of, like I said, it took her 30 years to write it, all of the research that goes into it in terms of recreating the life of an enslaved woman. Brilliant work. Right Where the Woman came out last year by a friend of mine, Ruth P. Watson. It's about financier Maggie Lena Walker, about another figure who should be better known in terms of her having founded a bank in Virginia, Richmond, Virginia, around the time of the beginning of the 20th century. And another important book in terms of the ways in which I, would think about biographical historical fiction, Douglas's Women by the esteemed Jewel Parker Rhodes, is about Frederick Douglass's wife and his mistress. So it is told alternately by both women, one Black, one white. And yeah, people didn't know about Frederick Douglass. Yes.
Messy.
Him to my students, I'm talking about Freddie was a rock star. He had groupies in every city. That's how it was when he was on his speaking tours. He was a man who had a big old mane of hair and a deep voice, and the ladies just, poured in. But one in particular moved into his house with
Oh.
him and his wife and lived down the hall for a time in terms of that. So, yes, Douglas's Women, very, very good book.
Awesome. And we have all of these that we'll recommend. We'll send you the links in a couple days. All right, Anaya, do you want to go next?
Yes, I can go next. The House of Eve. I absolutely love this book. So it's pretty much like how two people cross paths. Two different women, two different lives. One is very young. She experiences a lot of hardships, but she's trying her hardest. She's in school and you know, things around her neighborhood, it gets to her. She ends up becoming pregnant. And then we have another woman on the other side of town. She's going to a prestigious school. She ends up marrying a doctor, but she has some problems with conceiving. So they cross paths in that way. With I don't want to ruin it for anybody. And then they meet again. So it's a very nice tale. A lot of motherhood, a lot of going on in there. The Kindest Lie also follows kind of the same format, a secret, some cross paths, and then the Yellow Wife. I haven't gotten to that one yet. It's on my top to read book, but I also just wanted to suggest that one.
I
Yeah,
need
both,
to read
both Sadiq
those.
and Nancy are great authors and they're nice people too. So.
Yeah.
Oh, perfect. I love it. All right, and then I will go next. So I wanted to highlight a nonfiction book that caught my eye. This one I think came out in 2022 and it's called Twice as Hard, and I felt it kind of emulated the theme that we were talking about with Anne Lowe, where these women physicians needed to work twice as hard. So it's stories of Black women who fought to become physicians from the Civil War to the 21st century. So I think the historian highlights 9 different historic women who had to do that. So that sounded really good to me. And then Wake is the hidden history of women-led slave revolts. And this one is actually a graphic novel. So if you like to read kind of nonfiction history in a graphic format, this would be a really great choice for you. That's by Rebecca Hall. And it highlights the existence of enslaved Black women warriors and 2 of them, Adono and Alele, on the slave ship, the Unity. So I already put that on hold. I haven't read it yet, but it looks great. And then I had read this one a long time ago, not that long ago, but a while ago for a book club we had in the past, and it's called Song of a Captive Bird. And this is one of these narrative biographical nonfictions, and it is about the poet, an Iranian poet who had she was a woman in Iran and having to kind of fight against what that means in Iran to write her poetry. So I hope you enjoy these picks, everyone. And then we do have a couple of questions in the chat, which we'll get to in just a second. I just want to highlight a couple upcoming programs. So on April 2nd, I'll be hosting our next Romance Readers Book Club here at the East Branch. We're going to read Bend Toward the Sun. And then we have a bunch of other great books coming up, including An Island Princess Starts a Scandal and The Art of Scandal in June and August. That's an in-person
Good,
book
good.
club. Yeah, it was really hard to pick, and I was like, I can only, but I tried. And then if you can make it, Saturday, March 9th, the Rare Books Room has been opening up to visitors to check out various collections. So on March 9th, it'll be Treasures of the Rare Books Room, The Art of Japan. And if you can get down there, the librarians do such a great job showcasing all the wonderful things that we have in our collection that you can't put on hold or, usually see unless you go down there. So if you can ever make it, highly recommend. Have you been able to go to any of those, Anaya?
I have not. Every time I always want to, but I'm
Hmm.
always working a different task.
Yep. You're like, "Ugh." I know, same.
Yeah.
I'm on that Saturday, so I'm like, I'll be here. So if you can go,
Funny.
let us know how it goes. All right, and then I'm gonna turn these slides off, and then we just have a couple questions for you, Piper, from our audience. Leslie, I guess these questions are similar. So Leslie would like to know, can you talk a little bit about the freedoms and restrictions that you experience while writing historical fiction? And then a follow-up will be the difference between researching and creating characters from scratch. So let's do the first one, which is, what are some of your freedoms and restrictions that you experience when you write
Well, the
historical fiction?
genre of which The Yellow Wife is one of this genre that I write in, is biographical historical fiction genre, where you're using sort of these real life stories, or you're compelled to. One of the expectations of it is that you put an author's note at the end that lets the reader know where you might have taken creative license liberties. It talks about the research that you've done. Very often, the author's note will provide a list of books that you might have consulted, or a list of resources that you might have consulted in terms of writing the book. So the understanding, if you will, amongst um, historical fiction people who are writing this kind of biographical text or whatever, is that um, it's not that there's a restriction necessarily, but that you're guided by the historical facts, and that the fiction part comes in when you're creating plausible connections between those historical facts. And so it's kind of like there is a boundary around it, but it's a pretty broad boundary. And part of it is that the story takes precedence, so that it's not just an episodic litany of historical facts. That's what you're looking to relieve that text from. And the difference of it between, say, a biography and or biographical historical fiction. Um, and like I said, it's like a historical fiction character, or a real life person, say in the guise of Anne Lowe, or Alice Roosevelt and Portia Washington, who are the protagonists of my next book, American Daughters. That there are certain aspects of their lives that are, kind of rigid skeletal. Everybody knew that Alice Roosevelt was kind of a wild child. She was out there, and that Theodore Roosevelt said, I can either run the country or I can control Alice, but I can't do both at the same time about her. Kind of thing. Everybody knew this about her, so I would be remiss not to include some of that. But the other aspect for it, in terms of that and other historical fictions about her, most poignantly, I always wanted to know was why, and so this part, in terms of this very traumatic and rocky beginnings of her life and her childhood, and how she, even as an entitled and privileged white woman, had this in common with Portia Washington, who, as an entitled and privileged Black woman of a very famous Black man, but still was a Black woman of the early 20th century, were able to bond regardless of their differences or whatever. I enjoy what I do very much. I would like to continue it. I don't know how possible that is, given the market forces and all of that. But yeah, but my goal, at least, is to try to bring life and light to these undiscovered people. But the thing about historical fiction, the reason why we had the author's note with the bibliography, is to start people looking for more. That's the whole point of the genre. Mm-hmm.
Love that. Okay, and then the follow-up question was, can you discuss the difference between researching historical figures for historical fiction and creating characters from scratch for contemporary? Which do you enjoy most right now?
Yeah, as I said, it's in terms of almost like whatever I get to do in terms of that, in terms of the market forces. I have a couple of other story ideas in mind, and we'll see if they see daylight in terms of that. But yeah, hopefully, I like doing what I do in terms of writing fiction. I hope I can continue doing that.
Yes. Buy Piper's books. or ask us to buy them.
Yes,
That works too.
right. Librarian, that's exactly
We
what
will do that.
Good. We like that very much.
Love it. So I know you're all gonna run to look for By Her Own Design, put on hold right now if you haven't, and then I can assure you that American Daughters is on order or will be soon, because I triple checked, our selector has it in their cart, and it's just how it works with like how they order it and how it gets cataloged. So it's coming, and I will hopefully have
I mean,
a
I
link.
know from what I've heard from librarians, I think the most arduous work is getting it in the system. So when you show it, it's like it's in the system. So yay, that's good.
Yep. So it's just like hit send. So it'll be coming, and we will make sure you get the links for all of that and all the books that was discussed by Piper and myself and Anaya. And then do we have any other? I think that's it. All the questions. And Piper, where can everyone keep in touch with you? And then of course we will include the information when we send the video link.
Yes, through my blog, which is piperhuguley.com. You say contact me and I respond very
She
quickly.
does.
Yeah, Facebook, Piper G. Huguley, Instagram, Piper_Huguley, and I'm still on Twitter at Piper Huguley.
Well, I just want to say thank you again so much. I'm so glad we were able to have you here tonight with Milwaukee Public Library. Anaya, thank you too for being here.
Thank you.
And yeah, we'll see you all next time on the book chat. Have a great night, everybody.
Have a good night.
Bye. And it